Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. This week we've got an exclusive for you. It's the latest research from Ryan Strategic Advisory. This research is being announced simultaneously here on the podcast and live at the CX Outsourcers Mindshare Conference in Windsor, UK at exactly the same time. Peter Ryan is a good friend of CX Files. He's the Principal Analyst at Ryan Strategic Advisory, and each year his company publishes the Front Office BPO Omnibus survey. This survey is the collected opinion of over 500 decision makers in the contact center and CX industry. On this podcast, Peter will explain how he puts the research together and the 5 most popular countries for contact centers right now. As I said, this is an exclusive. At this exact moment the podcast was published, Peter was revealing his survey results to a live audience in the UK. So this is the first place where you can hear about this research. So please take a moment to share the podcast with a friend in the industry who could be interested. Okay, so now let's go straight to the interview with Peter Ryan. Okay, Peter, so you've just released the 2019 Front Office BPO Omnibus survey. Just before we talk about the results this year, could you maybe explain the profile of the respondents and the methodology you've used for the research?
Absolutely, Mark, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you and to your listeners about the 2019 Front Office BPO Omnibus survey today. It's really very much a continuation of the efforts we've been making at Ryan Strategic Advisory for the last few years, really since the company started, to get into the minds of what the enterprise buyers are saying with regards to their views on contact centers and what's happening within their own operations. So to give you a sense of the flavor of this year's survey, we decided that it would be better to try and go for a larger sample size. We've had really good sample sizes the past couple of years, but this year we decided to go big. And we surveyed nearly 500 individuals that have strategic decision-making authority over their national contact center operations. The individuals that we surveyed were in the United States, in France, Germany, Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom. And they encompassed respondents from across 11 different vertical markets, ranging from telecommunications to retail banking, insurance. We were also looking at the new digital economy and companies that comprise that, all the way through to elements such as the public sector and utilities. So really a great gamut of respondents from across a lot of different sectors, different countries, and different revenue sizes.
Okay, that's fantastic. So before we go through the results then, could you maybe just tell us what happened last year?
Very, very good question, Mark. Last year, we, I think, saw some very interesting trends come out in terms of offshore location favorability. Now, just to be clear, we asked the respondents that took part in last year's survey, and I would just emphasize, last year's survey encompassed approximately 350 respondents from the UK, the US, Canada, and Australia. So really the main Anglosphere demand markets. We asked the question using a scale of 1 to 8, 1 being not at all favorable and 8 being very favorable, to give their degree of favorability to a number of different offshore locations for contact center delivery. Now, there were roughly 30 or so options that we included in the survey in 2018, and the results were fascinating. The Philippines came out on top. Second place was a tie between Malaysia and South Africa. India was in third place. We had Sri Lanka coming in at fourth and Mexico in fifth. So a real vast number of countries, mainly ones that were established offshore delivery points, countries that I've been covering as long as I've been an analyst in this space since the early 2000s. Sri Lanka was a bit of a surprise. But at the end of the day, this survey is all about looking at what the enterprise contact center buyers are thinking. And they gave us, I think, a very good range of both established as well as up-and-coming countries that rounded out the top 5 there.
Okay, great. And so what's the top 5 for 2019 then?
Well, Mark, I'm pleased to announce that we've got some very exciting results for 2019. In the In the case of announcing the top five, I know that this is one of the most anticipated sets of data results that happens in the front office contact center space, whether it's by the providers looking to find out what the top five are, whether it's industry analysts and observers. I feel sort of like David Dimbleby on election night when he's about to announce the exit poll results for those in the UK that are familiar with the BBC's Great Election Night programming. But I'm pleased to announce that the number one slot for the most favored location for offshore contact center delivery, according to our results in 2019, is going to be once again the Philippines. Now, in second place, we have a tie. For the second year in a row, South Africa has tied for second. This year, they are tying with India. There was only a hairline of difference, to like 1/100th of a decimal point difference between India and South Africa. So effectively, we're declaring a tie for second place in that regard. Malaysia comes in third place, the third year in a row that Malaysia has taken part in the top five most favored locations. And we've got a couple of newcomers to the top five this year, at least newcomers from the standpoint of the front office annual Omnibus survey. In fourth place, I'm pleased to announce that Egypt has made itself into the top five, and we saw elements of that over the last 12 to 18 months. We'll touch on that, I think, in our discussion in a little bit. And Morocco, on the back of very strong results from France, rounds out the top five, coming in fifth place.
Okay, fantastic. And so what sort of key trends did you observe this year that moved some of these countries up or down the charts then?
Well, look, at the end of the day, the Philippines has always been a very strong location in regards to performing English language contact center delivery. And as you look across the individual country results, the Philippines continue to do very well. Just if we look at the Anglosphere on its own, the Philippines rounded out the top five out of the English-speaking countries. I would say that the efforts that have been made by a lot of different providers in India to really sell India 2.0 as a great offshore contact center location, particularly around English language non-voice delivery, is definitely having traction. What's also having traction is South Africa's efforts to promote itself around the world. And I can tell you that they've been in North America over the course of the past few months. They recently made a trip to Australia to promote South African services. These efforts, I think, are really gaining traction. They're really gaining stickiness. And this is why South Africa is continuing to maintain, I think, a very strong positioning with regards to its offshore contact center value proposition. And the same goes for Malaysia. Malaysia is always being associated with high value work, especially for English language markets, whether it's high value voice-based work or non-voice based work. It certainly has maintained a lot of resonance when it comes to its offshore value proposition. And that's particularly noted, I would say, when we're looking at countries like Australia, where Malaysia formulates or constitutes a nearshore option. Now, Egypt is, I think, a great story. We've seen a lot of efforts on the part of the players that are based in Egypt, as well as ITDA, the country's national investment promotion agency, particularly for areas in IT services and BPO, to recreate the magic that the country had in the early 2000s and the momentum that it gained over the course of the next several years. We know that there was a drop-off after the Arab Spring in 2011, but what we also know is that the value inherent to Egypt was always there, which is why the company's outsourcing sector for contact centers never actually shrank. It slowed down, but it didn't shrink because of the language skills, because of the talent that you find on the ground, and because of the value around the price point. Now, with this in mind, there's been a lot of promotional efforts from the perspective of Egypt with the stakeholders from the standpoint of getting the country's name reestablished around the world. And this has clearly had traction in the survey results this year. And when it comes to Morocco, Morocco is, I think, long established itself as a spot for very high value French language work. And that carried through substantially in this year's results, where in France, amongst French respondents, Morocco was by far and away the first choice in terms of the most favored location. But it also maintained, I would say, some very interesting results from Canada, where, as you know, Mark, we've got a very large French-speaking population. I live live in Montreal, which is the second biggest French language city in the world. Morocco rounded out the top 5 in Canada as a location, I think once again, due to its capacity for French. And it also maintained, I think, some interest from some of the more English language-based countries, given the fact that there is an English language element that you find in Morocco, and it's popping up as a niche location where you can find decent levels of scalability for agents that are either bilingual or that can provide French language or English language support. So these were the results, very exciting results, I think, that we've seen a number of traditional mainstay locations, again, rounding out the top 5, but also a couple of new entrants. And that's the beauty of the Omnibus survey. It's always there to surprise.
Well, those are the big successes this year, but were there any underperformers who dropped considerably?
There were some underperformers, Mark. I don't want to undermine any location's offshore value proposition. What we did see was that there was a bit of a drop-off in Turkey. They have consistently been going down the ladder over the course of the past few years. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's been a fair amount of reported on political instability and public security concern there. Equally, I don't think that the country has been promoting its offshore value to the rest of the world the way it was perhaps 5 or 6 years ago, which is unfortunate. There was a bit of a drop-off in a number of the American nearshore locations. Again, I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that we have included 2 non-English-speaking countries, or 2 countries where there's not a Spanish language or English-Spanish component to them, in the form of France and Germany, where quite frankly, Latin America was not that popular a location, and you wouldn't expect it to be. But that effectively, I think, had an impact on pushing some of these locations down, notwithstanding that the American nearshore locations did quite well in the United States and Canada. There were a couple of other good news stories that I would just want to talk about very quickly. We saw that Colombia increased its popularity across a number of different locations in terms of the demand markets that we surveyed. We also saw Jamaica continue to make its way up the rankings. And we also saw that Senegal performed very well too. It's a country I recently visited. There's a lot of potential there, especially from French language delivery. And with that in mind, just to finish off, Northern Ireland finished very well. We weren't just quizzing about countries, we were quizzing about jurisdictions, and certainly from the perspective of a cost-effective location that's very, very near the United Kingdom, near England, Scotland, and Wales. Northern Ireland certainly positioned itself quite well in that regard.
Okay, so that's a fantastic summary of the Omnibus survey. How can the listeners get hold of it or find out more information about it then?
Well, anybody who's interested in finding more out about the 2019 Front Office BPO Omnibus survey can certainly email me at peter@ryanadvisory.com. Equally, there will be an opportunity to find out more on my website and my blog. I'll be talking about a lot of these results going forward. I look forward to chatting with anybody who's got an interest in what contact center enterprise decision makers are saying, not just with regards to offshore favorability, but to a whole host of different elements around their own operations, channel preferences, their views on outsourcing as a business model, how they're looking at applying technology. The Omnibus survey has it all.
Peter, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm @Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.